Berlin was basically the fighting ground of politics through culture. Every intellectual was leftish. The whole political right wing, which basically came from Munich, did not play any role in the beginning. The whole town was in the hands of leftish ideas.
But outside Berlin, the right-wing nationalist movement was attracting scores of disillusioned Germans, including one obscure Austrian corporal by the name of Adolf Hitler. Hitler, like many of the right-wingers, hated this new Berlin, a city bursting with Bolsheviks, socialists, revolutionaries, Slavs, and Jews. One day, these Berliners would pay a high price for that hatred. But in the early 1920s, Berliners had more immediate concerns.
By 1922, inflation was spiraling wildly out of control. It got to the point where people would be paid in the morning and have suitcasefuls of banknotes, and they would have to then run to the shops because in the time between being paid and the time when they bought their goods, their food, the prices would have risen.
With virtually every currency in the world more valuable than the German mark, foreign tourists flocked into the city to take advantage of the cheapest sex on the continent.
You had tourists coming from all over the world. $10 in American money could buy you anything you wanted.
If you knew what to look for, you could find anything known to man in the sexual world was available on the streets of Berlin.
On any given night, as many as 100,000 prostitutes walked the streets or worked the sex clubs across the city.
There were all different whores with different kinds of makeup on the street. For instance, one was called Mutzi. Mutzis, who were prostitutes who hung out on just one street, Mutzstrasse, and these were pregnant prostitutes. And this being Germany, instead of just having pregnant prostitutes together, they were strung out on the street according to how pregnant that they were, so limousines stopping there could choose exactly how pregnant they wanted their Mutzi. There were prostitutes who looked horrible, who had acid-scarred faces or hunchbacks or were lame or crippled. These were called grasshoppers. You had mother and daughter teams on one street that dressed exactly alike.
Here in Berlin, sex for sale offered every sort of perversion or fetishism imaginable. There was not a sexual appetite that could not be satisfied in this city. Berlin had become the center of sexual experimentation. It also became the center of scientific research into sex, led by a pioneering doctor.
Long before Kinsey or Masters and Johnson, there was one German who is credited with inventing the whole notion of sexology or sexual science. And this was a very funny character called Papa, or the Einstein of sex in Berlin. It was Magnus Hirschfeld. Hirschfeld was a queer, Jewish, social democrat and a great liberal who really defined the liberal spirit of Berlin.
In 1919, Hirschfeld and Anita Berber appeared in a German silent film called Different from the Others. It's the story of a homosexual violinist who's being blackmailed. This was the first movie in history to portray homosexuality so openly and so sympathetically. The film ends with Magnus Hirschfeld pleading for the rights of homosexuals. The crusading doctor for sexual freedom was also the founder of the world's first institute devoted to the scientific study of sex.
He had an institute in the very center of Berlin that became something of a tourist attraction because it was a huge complex that had the biggest library on sexual matters and pornography ever assembled since the Romans.
And then, on May 6, 1933, at the urging of Joseph Goebbels, the Institute of Sexual Science, Magnus Hirschfeld's great dream of sexual knowledge, was raided. A few days later, his bust was hoisted on a spike and consigned to the flames. Along with his works, there were others whom the Nazis had decided were too decadent for their new Germany.